Morning and welcome to this Training 20. We have got Functional Friday today and we're focusing all on the crunch or crunches. Now this is a very basic exercise that a lot of people start doing to work on the core. It's far from one of the best core exercises you can be doing, but it's still quite useful because it's very simple, very basic. A lot of people start with it when it comes to the core, and it's not a bad exercise including workouts. So although there's better exercises out there, it's still good to include in workouts. But the thing is, you also need to make sure you're getting the most out of it too, because stuff like sit-ups and crunches can be done with a lot of momentum, and we want to make sure we're getting the most out of them to be working the core, because at the end of the day, they are a core exercise. It's not about the reps, it's about making sure you're using the right muscles. So that's why I'm doing a Training 20 on this today. So we're going to get straight into it with the basics, and they all start off with the same kind of line core basics that I've been through with you on other functional sessions. So bring yourself down to the floor, looking at your position first. So in a standard crunch, we're going to have your feet flat and your knees up, feet quite close to the bum. Now the next part is, like we've talked about before, is this back. We don't want that arch in the back. We want to tuck the hips up, keep the ribs down, engage the core by bracing the core here, and we've got that nice flat back to the floor. And that's our starting position here, okay? So having that floor position is key first. I want to avoid having that arch. Having these legs up helps. It's harder to keep the back flat and the core and hips tucked up unless you've got really good hip and core control with the legs straight. So having these feet up here makes it easier for you to start off. So make sure the hips are tucked, ribs down, core strong here. Now we're going to start off with our arms up like so, and go for the most basic kind of crunch that you can do, which is literally a lift up of the shoulders. It's very simple, don't overthink it. We're not doing a sit up here. Simple crunch is literally that movement there. So from the lying down position, my shoulders are off the floor, not by much. My core is very engaged. My lower to mid back is still down flat on the floor, and my shoulders are just reaching up and then controlled down there, back to that starting position. So we're focusing mainly on these upper core muscles up here, performing this crunch. As you can see, there's not much movement below the rib cage really. So if you watch again, up we go, reach, and back down. Now I've got my arms up here, and they're not doing much at all, which is a good thing. I'm just purely trying to use my core, and that's the thing we're going to be talking about mostly today. See, a lot of time with sit-ups and it's fine. You got sit-up reach-throughs like so, or just crunches like this, and it's a good way to start. Using those arms is a good way to start, but eventually you want to be making sure we're really focused on the core. So I would start off with a crunch here and see how you feel, crunching up and back down like so. And can you, more importantly, hold that position? Like any exercise we do, if you go straight down and up into a squat, or any kind of exercise where you've got no control, we're not getting as much out of it as we want. And I've talked to you about that a lot. So we want to be able to hold in that hardest position, like holding a deep squat. So up here, reach, can you use your core to hold, and then back down like so. So that's what we're looking for here. That is your most basic crunch that I want you to start with if you're going to start doing crunches. As you can see, my shoulders rest down every time, my head's resting down, shoulders and head come up. I'm using that upper core, and then back down they go like so, okay? So we're going to use a sofa or a chair next for the next level. So the problem with sit-ups a lot of the time is your hip flexors. This can be the same with leg lifts and hanging stuff. You can be using your hip flexors more than using your core. Hip flexors being here. So when you feel that strain up into the quads when you do sit-ups and crunches, that's your quads and your hip flexors doing some of the work. And it's fine, you can't help it. Your body is just trying to help you perform the movement that you're trying to perform. But there's ways, if we're focusing solely on the core, there's ways in which we can kind of try and switch those off to avoid them being used. The first one is using something like a chair or a sofa. You're going to prop your leg, you're going to get your bum nice and close, prop your legs right on top, and my legs are completely relaxed now. This means my hip flexors are in a flex position, and they can kind of just relax. I'm going to come here, I'm going to crunch up, hold, and then back down. So now I don't have to worry about my hip flexors doing much. You may have even felt it when we were doing the original one with just your feet flat. Even though there, it's quite easy to keep the hip flex off as well, if your feet are flat and relaxed. But this is a great way to perform a crunch with your feet up, to avoid using those hip flexors, like so. So really just focusing on that upper core here. Now, when you're in this position, the control, obviously we're just doing a tiny little crunch, lifting up, and that's what you need to do. What you can do, you can work up into that crunch and try and reach further up. You crunch, reach. So now I'm using more of the core to try and get that slightly higher position, like so. Up and back down. So that's what you want to work on here, is your range of motion of that crunch. Now if I was to do a sit up like so, then that is still kind of using these muscles down here, and that's fine. Again, there's nothing wrong with these sit-ups. They work the core a lot. But if you can first of all build up your core, just using your core alone, arms up so they're not doing much at all, reach and back down. If I try and do that and all the way up, it's like super hard to bring yourself up without, see how they're pulling in the legs eventually. So that's the difference. You got to be honest with yourself and find what's working. Sit up, I can do that, but I know I can feel some work going on here. If I purely just try and use the crunch up, very difficult to get any further without trying to pull with my legs or hip flexors, okay? So that's what we're looking for here. We're looking to just isolate the core in this position. Once you can do that, you can get rid of whatever you're using here and just go for a knees up crunch. So you're going to hold yourself in this position like so. So now the hip flexors and stuff are actually on, as they're having to hold up your legs. But it still gives you a good opportunity to switch on the lower core. So now your lower core is having to help hold up your legs as well. So we've got core engagement down here, and then we're looking at that crunch with the knees up. So crunch up, reach, and back down. Your lower core is working to stabilize and hold up those legs, and your upper core, like before, is performing that crunch like so. Now, the same rules apply in this position here. Whether you've got your feet flat or your knees up, you need to maintain that hips tucked up. If anything, it's easier to keep those hips tucked there, which is good reason to use this knees up version. So core's engaged, and then we're here, up, like so. Obviously I can get higher by performing arm movements here. Again, that's fine, that's just a kind of variation. I don't really see those as done wrong. They're not done wrong at all, but it's a variation of an exercise where you're just kind of using a bit more momentum and to perform a bigger range of motion. In terms of the muscles that work, there's a wider range of muscles that work as well. Whereas, so this, you got arms swinging, using a bit of momentum to get higher. Your core's still working a lot. Here, it's pretty much the core working on its own, like so. So there's kind of two options. If you want to really just focus on the core, then that smaller movement is a great way to do so. So moving on from there, I've been talking about the arms a little bit already. Just then, I obviously showed you arms above the head into that crunch. That allows you to come up more. A great way to test your core is even here. I'm kind of reaching with my arms upwards. It kind of helps a lot. So what you can do is kind of keep your arms above your head. Now, being strict on this is very difficult. It's so easy to cheat without wanting to by just kind of lifting your arms forward slightly, like so. If you try and switch your arms off and keep them above the head the whole time, and just crunch up here, you can really feel how hard that can be on that core. Perform a crunch without using those arms at all. It makes it a ton harder, but you feel the core working a lot more. Same with that, knees up. If we're here, crunch and back down. See how that feels. It'll give you a good indication of how much core you're working on the other exercises. but try to avoid that kind of little shift forward with the arms, because it does make a big difference in terms of how much the core has to work. There's no doubt the core's still working, but how much the core is working when the arms assist is a different matter. So really practice if you want to strengthen that core on the controlled movement without the arms assisting at all. So moving on from there, we're going to move on to the reverse crunch. So really effective. Reverse crunch, first of all, we're looking for a single leg. Now, like I've talked about already, reverse crunch is all about the legs, but it all comes down to this position here. So can you keep your back to the floor? Is your core engaged? When performing a reverse crunch, the same as a knees up crunch here, compared to feet flat, kind of relaxed, knees up, core on. It's the same with the upper body when you're performing a reverse crunch. So upper core relaxed, round the shoulders slightly off, engaged. So as if you're performing a half crunch. You're not really trying to stress and reach loads, but you're trying to engage that core. So, and like the knees up crunch, it's actually easier to keep the back flat and core engaged when these knees are up, even though it works your core harder. So that's why I recommend when performing a reverse crunch, have your hands down by the side, slide them down a bit, and lift those shoulders up. It helps you keep the ribs down, push the core down into the floor, and maintain that flat back. Because what we don't want to do when performing reverse crunches is arch, lose the core engagement, and you hear a lot of people complain about pinching on their back or uncomfortable position on their back when this happens. So that's the first thing we want to do to avoid that, is round those shoulders up. So when they go out, it's easier to keep your back flat the whole time and core engaged. So first of all, think about that, keeping those shoulders off. The second part of it is we're going to start with a single leg first of all. So you're up here like so, and we're looking to extend out and back in like that, okay? Now, when people do leg lifts and knees in and stuff, you see a lot of people hand under the bum like so. This kind of just allows, it makes it easier to perform the crunch, because it allows you not to arch as much. So if you see I'm arched here and you use that cushion there, it's almost keeping you out of that arch. Now if you really struggle with these exercises, that's the way to do it. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of it at all. I think it's better to get the control properly. So as you can see here, big arch, hands under the bum, allow me to kind of force it into a rounded position to then keep my back down. And that's why people naturally want to put their hand under their bum. Preferably, do it using your core and work your way out in terms of how far you go. So you would be better off keeping tucked up here, finding that position, and just going out to your range of motion. If you can go to there and then pull in whilst keeping the core engaged, then great. If you go any further, you start to arch, then we don't want to go that far. That's when people start to use their hands instead, because they feel they're losing the core, putting it on the back. But we want to engage the core, make sure we're strengthening the core rather than just making the hands do some of the work for us by forcing us into that rounded flat back position. So by being in this position here, core strong, start with one leg at a time, out you go until you feel you're just about to lose control. Stay within that controlled range of motion, like so. It doesn't matter if it's only this far, that's fine. You're still working the core, especially when you're keeping these shoulders up. You'll eventually build up some strength and be able to go further and further until you eventually can tap those heels down whilst keeping those hips tucked up and the core strong. It's always about keeping the hips tucked up. As soon as you lose that hip tuck, you arch, and that back is opened up and the core is doing a lot less for you. So practice, build up your range of motion here, like so. So this is an alternating reverse crunch. So once you've built up here, you can feel you go all the way, or you don't have to actually do that, but I recommend building up there first. But it's the same with the reverse crunch. So full reverse crunch, exactly the same. Again, you can relax back here. I recommend crunching up, and then you're going to go both feet out again. Only go a certain range of motion, depending on how much control you can maintain on your core. So if you can only go a certain distance before you start to lose it, then bring it back in. Maintain that back flat, and then as you can, go further out, maintaining those hips tucked up. Very easy to lose those hips. But if you can keep them tucked up and core strong, then you can go full range of motion, performing those reverse crunch there. And this is a reverse crunch, like so. Feet go all the way out. They can just hover off the floor, they can tap the floor, and then back in. Okay, so that's the reverse crunch, and ways to perform it. We're going to go on to the sit-up next. So sit-up I've talked to you about already. It's a lot of hip flexors involved, and that's okay. You can't get away from that. If you want to be doing sit-ups, which is not necessary to do, crunch and reverse crunch are probably better exercises. But sit-ups, I do sit-ups occasionally. They are fun and a good exercise to throw in there. But just use the points we've been through to try and use the core more than the momentum. If you're here swinging, using full-on momentum like so, then you are doing a pointless exercise. That's what I kind of want to get across. Although there's nothing wrong with sit-ups, performing in a way where you're kind of using no core engagement at all is just kind of pointless, and you're better off doing something else. So you can perform sit-ups in a good way. Just make sure you're trying to use the muscles that you're supposed to be training. So with the core, you got hands above the head, crunch up, reach. Try and use as much momentum in the arms as possible and as much core as possible. But obviously you're using as much arms as you need to perform the full range of motion. Up you go, crunch, and forward. You don't have to reach up in hands. You can kind of just crunch up here. People like to do hands on head, which is a good way to get rid of the use of the arms. But don't be pulling on your neck like this as well. Again, you're just giving yourself some neck ache more than anything else. It should be performed with nice controlled hands behind the head, crunching up. My elbows are pulling forward, that's that momentum you're trying to get. But I'm not pulling on my head, I'm not pushing down here. So I've got a nice gentle hands on my head. I can literally not even touch my head. So I'm not even pulling up, but my elbows are performing that same motion to kind of help with that sit-up, okay? So I can feel the core working there with your hands behind your head. You can do hands above the head, and you'll feel the core doing a lot of the work because you haven't got much momentum to go off. So like I said, just to cover that, hip flexors are working, legs are working, the momentum's working a little bit, but you want to mainly be using the core. Don't fool yourself into trying to perform loads of reps with really bad form. Because if you actually think about the form you're doing, you probably don't feel it much on the core anyway until you've done 100 reps. So it's all about working the right muscles. It's the same with the jackknife. I'm quickly going to cover this. So same with the jackknife here. So in this position here, if we're to perform a jackknife, we're going to go knees in jackknife first. It's just a reverse crunch and the crunch at the same time. If you can't maintain a flat back at this position here, then don't go that far. And then you crunch up and then back. It's about keeping that control on the back by keeping the core constantly engaged. In and out you go, like so. And then a full jackknife is with your legs straight, maintaining that core engagement all the way up here. If you can't, I'd recommend starting with the knees in one, or just not going as far again, but that is more tricky on the full jackknife. But if you're losing that core integrity by arching the back, then we want to regress it back and make sure we're performing it properly. So you have to keep those ribs down, hips tucked to perform that jackknife, like so, okay? And then just to finish, just a little word. I've been speaking through this whole workout, and a lot of people ask me about breathing when it comes to crunches and core. The core muscles are very much involved in diaphragm and breathing, but it doesn't mean you can't brace and have a strong core whilst talking. So any exercise we'll perform today, you can still talk through them whilst having an engaged core. So although
the core does work a lot when on your diaphragm and your breathing. You can still talk and breathe whilst performing these exercises. So don't think it takes practice. It takes practice, but don't think you can't. It's just a case of understanding how to brace your core and perform and breathe at the same time. But if you really struggle with that, it's very hard to teach. I'm not sure I could do a video on it that'd be worthwhile. So if you are really struggling with that aspect of it, drop me a message. But otherwise, I hope you got something out of this Functional Friday today. I'll be posting the next schedule on Sunday like always. Otherwise, have a nice weekend.